At Sage, we know that estimating construction projects is all about being awarded work, but most importantly, it's about being awarded work at the right price. That means it's all about minimizing risk and protecting profitability. BidMatrix 3.7 is all about helping you minimize risk by putting your bid history to work for you in ways you never thought were possible. A series of training videos are available for the 3.7 release. We strongly encourage you to watch each of the 3 to 5 minute training videos. In addition to that, read the 3.7 release notes, and keep in mind the BidMatrix help documentation has been updated to reflect the changes in 3.7. Importantly, don't panic. For the most part, BidMatrix works the same way it did prior to 3.7. Most of these new enhancements are optional. So if you want to continue to use the product the way you were prior to 3.7, you're able to do that. Now, let's take a quick preview of the 3.7 enhancements. This preview will be an overview of the enhancements. And as I said before, there's a series of training videos available that we strongly encourage you to watch. Each one of those videos will be a really brief overview. So we will introduce you to libraries, a new user role in BidMatrix called a librarian. We'll introduce you to indexes, which is used for the normalization of bid history. We'll talk about an intelligent similar project search, so your ability to put your hands on projects that are very similar to the project you're currently working on, using suggested subcontractors on bid packages, using bid insights, or at least having access to bid insights on each of the bid packages contained in a project estimate. And then lastly, an option to publish projects and determine which projects you want to contribute to your searchable bid history. Now, having said that, we'll do a quick kind of flyover of the 3.7 features. And we'll jump in there and take a look here real quick. So some things that I had mentioned earlier is that we're introducing a new option called libraries. If I click on libraries up here, again, we'll go into these in more detail in each of the individual training videos. Be aware that project libraries now contain your project attributes, which used to be underneath the administration option on the toolbar, your subcontractor attributes, which also used to be on the administration option on the toolbar. And now cost categories and work breakdown structures exist as part of your libraries. Think of cost categories and work breakdown structures here as global, available to you for all projects that you create in BidMatrix. And then last, the concept of a cost index. We'll come back and take a look at that later. As I said in the PowerPoint slide, cost indexes are used to normalize the data that you're using in BidMatrix. I also talked about a new role, the librarian role, which is available in the admin panel. And if you go to users, you'll see that where before we just had 2 roles, an administrative role and a user role, you now have the ability to promote users to a librarian role. And we'll talk about what librarians have access and rights to do versus what a user has rights to do, as well as what the admin can still continue to do and maintain the system. We'll also talk about, as I said, an intelligent search. Again, to put your hands on projects that are similar to the project you're currently working on. If I click on the Vancouver Medical Center project, you'll notice there's a tab that wasn't here before called Insights. When I click on that, you'll see that the first thing that I see in that panel is a reference to similar projects. The idea is, regardless of how many projects I have in BidMatrix in my portfolio, we have the ability to put our hands on projects that are similar to the project you're currently working on. In this case, the Vancouver Medical Center, we found 14 projects that were similar in scope to that project. And we'll talk about how all that works in the similar projects training video. We also talk about using suggested subcontractors. I'm going to toggle over to a little different window here and talk about that. If I look at this particular bid package, so I'm in BidMatrix, I'm looking at a plumbing bid package. I can see that I've got 3 phases here. I also see some subcontractors left to right across the top. These are subcontractors that BidMatrix populated this BidMatrix with automatically because these subcontractors had bid these particular phases and had bid this bid package on 3 or more previous projects that are the ones that are similar in scope to the project I'm currently working on. And then we go further than that. We actually look at how they bid that work, and we can actually use that information to extrapolate what we anticipate their bid to be on the current project, on the current phase. And you see it here in the lower right corner where it says $1,071,000. That gives me a ballpark of what I anticipate their bid to be on this project. So I actually have a window into seeing what we anticipate that bid to be prior to even receiving the bid from the subcontractor. And we will cover that in detail as well. And last but not least, I could have hundreds and hundreds of projects in BidMatrix, not all of which I want to contribute to my bid history, and not all of which I want to be used to do kind of real-time benchmarking like we were just looking at in that individual bid package. And you'll see here that some of these projects have a badge in the upper right corner, and that's because those projects were published. And publishing a project is very easy. If I determine that this project is a good project and I want it to contribute to my subset of projects, I can actually just click on the ellipsis here, click publish, and now that project is also part of my overall list of projects that are available to me to report on and do real-time benchmarking. So having said that, that kind of concludes the intro and overview, but that's just the beginning. We encourage you, as I said before, to watch each of the individual training videos. Introducing a new BidMatrix 3.7 feature called libraries. Libraries store global data. That is data that is not specific to a single project. So when you create a new project, the information in your libraries is available to you because it, again, kind of stretches across projects and is just available each and every time you create a new project. The information stored in libraries includes project attributes, subcontractor attributes, cost categories, work breakdown, and indexes. It's also important to point out that while most of you will have a single library with information in each of those categories, it's possible to have multiple libraries. Maybe you have multiple divisions in your company, and the information and the data in each of those divisions is radically different. Then you could set up additional cost libraries, and the data, of course, stored in each one of those libraries would reflect the information needed for the individual division. So having said that, let's take a look at libraries. So libraries is available on the toolbar. This is a new option. You wouldn't have seen this prior to 3.7. Administrations was previously added to the toolbar. If I click on libraries, I get some high-level information about the kind of information that is stored in your BidMatrix library. But over here on the left-hand navigation panel, I can see that I have project attributes, which previously used to be part of administration. And since that is maintaining and setting up project attributes is more of a estimating task in a lot of ways than it would be somebody who's just administering the system, it is now actually part of BidMatrix libraries and not found in the admin navigation panel anymore. Other than that, everything remains the same about your project attributes. In fact, if you've already got them set up, you'll just see them here underneath libraries. Subcontractor attributes, same as project attributes. Used to be stored under administration. Now it is part of your library. Cost categories. One thing important here is cost categories. You used to see them when you set up a new project. You would see the cost categories for that project. They're now stored here under library because they're global. Every time you set up a project, the categories available to you will be the cost categories that you see here in your library. And one of the things we always point out is, unlike, Sage estimating or most previous systems, estimating systems today, there's usually some limit to the number of cost categories. Here you can have unlimited cost categories. Where that becomes beneficial is, you'll notice I have a labor category here, but we've had some customers say that they would like to add a cost category, maybe call it field labor, as opposed to just labor or administrative labor. And by clicking this box, I can tell the system that I want to have a productivity factor available to me. And of course, this sets up the appropriate columns in your estimate sheet in BidMatrix so that you can actually enter a productivity for this new cost category that I'm setting up called field labor. So if I want new cost categories and I want productivity to be associated with that cost category, I need to check that box. You can also go ahead and select an icon. I'm just going to pick a random one here. You can select an icon for that new cost category. I'll say OK. And now I have a new cost category here called field labor, and that cost category will be available to me now every time I set up a new estimate in BidMatrix. Work breakdowns. One of the things that's important here, this is pretty exciting, is the system actually looked at, if you were a Sage customer, for example, or you were just a BidMatrix customer in general, and you had multiple projects that you'd already set up in BidMatrix, maybe dozens of projects or hundreds of projects. We actually look at all those projects. We look at the work breakdown structures in those projects. We look at the work breakdown structures that you have previously used in each and every one of those projects. We actually build your work breakdown structures for you in your libraries. So if you look at these, I actually did not set each of these up. So if you look at phase or you look at group phase, I did not manually enter any of these. These were set up for me because in BidMatrix 3.7, we look at your history. If you have history, project history, we set up these work breakdown structures for you based on the work breakdown structures that you have set up on previous projects. Now, one of the things I'm going to come back to at the end of this video is, some of you may be thinking, well, I don't have any history, I don't have any projects in BidMatrix yet. I'm a new user to BidMatrix, and you still don't want to have to manually create each one of these and all the possible values. And I'll show you a feature that we've added to simplify that project if you're a new user and you're setting up work breakdowns for the first time. Last but not least, we added an indexing capability so that you can go in and, since we're a big part of 3.7 is using your previous bid history to provide insights on bids that you're receiving from subcontractors on the project you're currently working on. Of course, that data becomes far more valuable if you can normalize that data, regardless of when the project was created or where it was created. If you can normalize that data by applying an index and bring all of that those past data points forward to the date and location of the project you're currently working on. And what makes all that possible is your ability to set up an index. More about indexes in another training video. One of the things I talked about here is, I'll come back to work breakdowns. If I don't have any previous projects to essentially mine and create these work breakdowns for me automatically, what do I do? And one of the things that we added to the system is, at the top of the work breakdown structure dialog window, there's an option called import. So if I didn't have any work breakdown structures set up at all, I could click import, and you see this dialog will open up, and it will allow me to point to a Sage estimate, a WinEst estimate, an Excel spreadsheet, a Word document, or even just a text document. We can point to those, and we will go ahead and look for the work breakdown structures that exist, for example, in that Sage project, and we will build your work breakdown structures for you based on the project that you pointed to here. And so again, we can avoid having to manually set up all those work breakdowns. So one of the next training videos to watch is one where we introduce a new role called a librarian, because if we now have libraries that store data across projects, we also introduce a role as to who can manage your cost libraries. More on that in the next training video. New in BidMatrix 3.7 is a new user role called a librarian. In an earlier video, we introduced BidMatrix libraries. The people who can manage those libraries have to have a role as either admin or librarian. And as I said, a new role is created. Someone assigned the librarian role can manage all data under projects, subcontractors, and libraries. Librarians do not have access to the administrative options. So what does that look like in the product? As we said before, we introduce you to the concept of libraries, where we store the information that is global across projects. You must have at least a librarian role to actually manage or edit the information stored in your project libraries. Users, people who have a user role, can see the information in their project libraries, but they have no rights to change that or edit that information. Administration is still here, but as you recall, we pulled project attributes and some contractor attributes out of administration, but the administrative role of managing the company information, the subscriptions, users, reports, so on and so forth, that is still found underneath the administrative panel. If you want to elevate someone from a user role to an administrative role, you can do that here, where you simply go to the admin panel underneath users. This is where you will see the new options. So if I want to give Sarah access and the ability to manage and edit the libraries, projects, and subcontractors, I can promote her to a librarian. So if I click here, I'll get the message that I want to promote her to a librarian. She will also receive a message that she has been promoted to a librarian, and now she can get in and she has full access to manage projects, manage subcontractors, and manage and edit libraries. So that new role is necessary for estimators or users that you want to be able to not only go in and view information in libraries, but edit it. Also new in BidMatrix 3.7 is our indexes. Indexes fall underneath your libraries tab. Indexes are used to normalize bid history. Indexes are what are used to take your historical bid information and bring that information forward, bring the pricing information forward to the date and location of the project you are currently working on. That will be much more understandable when you watch the Bid Insights video, which is one of the videos in this training series. You'll see how important that is. It really takes your bid history and makes that data far more valuable when you're able to bring that data forward to the date and the date and location of the project you're currently working on. There are 4 options for setting up an index. You can use the consumer price index, and the consumer price index by region. Those 2 indexes are just part of BidMatrix. So if you want to use those, you can just actually set those up and they'll be available to you. And of course, an option is to have a custom index. So some of you may already be tracking inflationary data, especially as it relates to construction. Maybe you have that information sitting in an Excel sheet. You actually have the ability to import and populate a matrix or an index in the BidMatrix product from Excel. So you can actually create a custom index and import that data from your own inflationary Excel sheet. Or if you're a Sage Estimating desktop user and you use the CK database and you're already using a cost index over there, we will read that information for you and make it available to you as one of your indexing capabilities in the BidMatrix product. And then one last thing is setting up an index is optional. It is strongly recommended because, again, it just provides more value to your bid history. Even if you were to just go in and create a simple cost index where maybe you enter in inflationary data on an annual basis and you track it on an annual basis and you use a default inflationary value or an inflationary factor, maybe you inflate costs every year by 3.5%. That is probably going to be more valuable than not having an index at all. So it is strongly recommended that you set up an index. Let's take a look at where that happens in BidMatrix. Again, I said indexing was available underneath your new libraries tab. So if I go to libraries, I can see that cost indexes is one of the options I have here. And again, I'm able to get to this because I have either an administrative role or a librarian role. So if I go to cost indexes, I can see here that I've actually already set up some cost indexes. I mentioned before that you can actually select the CPI index, which is not even based. It's kind of a composite index across the country, regardless of the region. Or you could set up the regional consumer price index, where you can see I have inflationary data. And in my particular case, it dates back to 2015 because that's the oldest project that I have in BidMatrix. But I can see that I not only have inflationary data and the factors year over year, but I have that information broken down by region. And so that's the advantage of using the regional consumer price index. You'll also notice that there's a little padlock out here to the left if you're using these two, either one of these indexes, and that's because these indexes are kind of maintained through the Consumer Price Index web service. So we continually go out, if you're using one of these indices, we go out and check to see if there are any updates to the index. Therefore, they're locked down so that you don't get out of sync with the service itself. I also set up a custom index. And so this is my example as a custom index. And I did a very simple index, and this shows you just how simple it could be. So I have a year-over-year index, 01/01/20 through 12/31/2020, and you just start with a default factor. You just use a factor, and then because these are relative through time, now when I go to the next year, I put in my new factor, and I can see that in this particular case, there was a 3.2% inflation rate from 2020 to 2021. And I can see that because I took my factor from 96.8 to 100. And then the next year, there was a 4.2% inflation, so on and so forth. The default, you can actually track, you can actually break your inflationary factors down by cost category if you choose. Again, that would mean that you have access to that from your own data or you've been tracking that somewhere, but you could do it. In the absence of actually entering factors for any of your cost categories, it will default and use the same factor that you've set up here in your default column. So in my particular example here, I didn't set up any specific factors for each of the cost categories. Rather, I am okay with using the default factor that I've set up in this initial column for every one of these factors. Now, the other thing that I can do is I could add a dimension to my custom index. I could say that I do want to track this by region. So I can introduce the concept of not just inflationary data over time, but inflationary data over time and by location. We'll take a look at that here in just a minute. But that could give me even a more detailed kind of breakdown of inflationary information and actually show me the differences between the cost of work between, let's say, Tacoma, Washington, and San Francisco. If I were building projects in both of those locations, of course, we know that the construction costs in San Francisco are considerably higher. So if I wanted to introduce a region or a location, I could. So how do I do all this? So we looked at some examples here. How do I do this? Initially, you wouldn't see any cost indexes, but if you go to add a cost index, here is the CPI all index, which is what we looked at here. We also looked at the CPI index broken down by region here. So I selected those. And here's your option to create a custom index. And a custom index, if I choose this, we can say that this is our time and location index. It's going to be a custom index that we create. And if I want to break it down by location, I can do that. So I could come in here and say, is it going to be by city or state? Maybe we do work in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Those are the 3 states we do work. So I want state to be one of the dimensions that gets added to my custom index. You could also add an additional option here. So I could come in here and say, I also want to track costs differently, maybe by one of my project attributes like market segment. So I could say that I have inflationary data as it relates to maybe healthcare work versus corporate office work, so on and so forth. I would suggest, again, this is going to be based on the information that you have access to. So keep it simple, but certainly look at the information that you have access to. Just know that you can create as many dimensions to your cost indices as you like. That is totally up to you. Right now, I just said I want a time and location index, and I'm going to use state for my dimensional input here. So now I come in here and say, okay, I could put in a time frame here and then choose, for the state of Oregon, and I could go ahead and create that information. And what the system does is it begins to build the shell of my index for me. So I've got my first year in here. When I hover over this, I can insert a row and start putting in additional periods of time. And what my factor is between those different periods of time, you can do annual, monthly, whatever you choose. And again, this would be by state. So I could put in my information for Oregon and how maybe that's changed year over year for the last 10 years in the state of Oregon. And then maybe next I'll tackle what it looks like in the state of Washington. And then I'll tackle what it looks like in Idaho. So you really have a lot of control over your indexing capabilities, and you can export this information. In fact, some people have said, well, we agree with the consumer price index mostly, but we don't agree with it 100% in certain areas, so we want to adjust it. And remember, I said that this was locked down. One of the things you could always do is take this index and make a copy of it. And once I make a copy of it, it becomes my custom index, and it's no longer locked down. It's no longer talking to the consumer price index service. And because I made a copy of it, now I could go in and edit and make changes in the copied version however I choose, because at that point, that copied index becomes a custom index. So that's how the indexing capabilities work. Stay tuned, because when you look at the Bid Insights training video, you'll see how powerful this is. We'll put one of our custom indexes to work for us in our Bid Insights video. Also new in BidMatrix is the ability to find projects that are similar to the one that you're currently creating from your existing list or project page, list of projects that you've created. Similar projects are used to populate bid packages with suggested subcontractors. In other words, subcontractors on each bid package that you're likely to be receiving bids from. And then to also provide what we're calling bid insights to the bids that you will be receiving from your subcontractors. So we'll be able to give you an idea, ballpark, of what that bid should look like. We also know that similar projects are defined as similar projects because they have some of the same attributes as the current project you're creating, and you get to determine how many of those attributes have to be a match to the project that you're currently creating. And only projects that are published are available when searching for similar projects. We'll have another training video on what that means to have a published project. You can manually remove or add projects to the list of projects that BidMatrix finds. So when BidMatrix searches your portfolio of past published projects, looking for those similar projects, you can actually add projects to the list that it finds, or you could find certain projects that maybe were outliers that you don't want to be used to provide bid insights and your list of suggested subcontractors. So having said that, let's take a look at what we've got here. So if we look at our project page here, the best way to show you how similar projects works would be to create a new project. We'll say this new project is our Hillsborough Medical Center, and we'll say it's in Hillsborough, Oregon. And we'll say it's got roughly it's a 24,000 square foot project. And we're going to put some pressure on ourselves by making the bid due today, in fact. One of the changes in 3.7 is the entering a client name or who the owner is optional now. You don't need to do that, but it's still there. I'm going to come in, and you know that your custom attributes that you set up in BidMatrix, this is where you provide your answers to your own custom attributes. And I might come in and say, the project I'm working on right now, this Hillsborough Medical Center, is a healthcare project. It is located in the Northwest, and yes, maybe it has an attached parking structure. And maybe the rest of these attributes I'll fill out later. I'll hit my next, and this, no change here. So would I like to use a previous project to create a new project? I'm going to click next to go move beyond that. No change here. So permissions, who in our company that has a license of BidMatrix am I going to allow access to the Hillsborough Medical Center project that I'm just now creating? No change here. Here's where the change is. The system kind of for me reached into my portfolio of projects and said, we found 16 projects that you've bid in the past that were also healthcare projects, for example, that met my project attributes. I can actually see those projects. So if I wanted to preview that list, I can see those here, or I could even go in and refine my search results. So I could come in here and say, that's great, the system found those projects for me, but I could come in here and add another condition, and what you have available to you is all of those project attributes, including the attributes on your summary page. Those are also available to you. But I might come in here and say, I'm only interested in projects where the size of the project is maybe within 5,000 square feet. And let's see here. Within 5,000 square feet. I'll click my add. And now notice what happened. The system eliminated 6 of those projects. And now it's refined my list down to 10 projects that match my criteria here. I'm only interested in healthcare projects and projects that are within 5,000 feet of my 24,000 square foot project. The other thing that I'm going to allow the system to do is look for those projects that are similar. Again, it found 10. And then when it looks at those projects, look into those projects. And if a subcontractor has bid the same bid package 3 or more times, then it will actually populate that bid package with the subcontractor. And I'm going to come in here, and here's where your indexes show up. This was discussed in an earlier training video. So every index that you've set up is available here. I just want to use my custom index that I created. So I'm going to go ahead and create this project. It's going to add this project to my portfolio, the Hillsborough Medical Center. And what I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to jump into a project, take a look at one I had set up previously, this Vancouver Medical Center. I'm going to go into this project, and let's take a look, because I talked about suggested projects. So if I come in here as an example, and I look at plumbing, my plumbing package, I have subcontractors that are already set up here, and you see this AI coloring scheme underneath each one of those. That lets me know that BidMatrix found these subcontractors bidding plumbing on 3 or more of my similar projects, and so it added them to my plumbing bid package on this project, because it assumed that if it found them on 3 or more of similar projects, I'm likely to get a bid from them on this project. And of course, I can remove or delete subs from this matrix. I could add 5 more if I wanted. I could add additional subcontractors if I want. If I click in an individual cell, it actually shows me, as I also mentioned on that PowerPoint slide, what their bid is likely to be on this project. And in this example, it tells me we're expecting a bid somewhere in the realm of $292,000, which is not too far off from our budget of $263,000. But the system was able to take that information from that past work and give me an insight into what we expect their bid to be. Now, I have another training video where we're going to be spending more time specifically looking at what we mean when we say a bid insight and what is all available to you here. So similar projects, super important to me, because again, I want to use projects that are like the project I'm currently in to actually do kind of that real-time benchmarking, in this case, provide and serve up the bid insight. In this recording, we will look at how BidMatrix 3.7 uses some new functionality that serves up suggested subcontractors and bid insights. And we've kind of highlighted this in some of the previous training videos, 3.7 training videos, but this one will focus specifically on suggested subcontractors and bid insights. A couple of reminders. Suggested subcontractors populate bid packages using the information we learn from subcontractors that have bid past similar projects. Bid insights, the actual insight into the bids that we are likely to be receiving from subcontractors, bid insights are provided when a suggested subcontractor has bid the same bid package phase on 2 or more of the past similar projects. Another thing that's really important to understand is BidMatrix does not automatically choose the bid insight to populate the bid that we would be receiving from a subcontractor. None of that happens automatically. You still are in control. You're in charge. Instead, the concept of the bid insight is to inform you of anomalies, which could mean those anomalies, as you know, and it can be painful when it's discovered, that those anomalies could mean that the bid that you're carrying, the number you got from the sub and maybe the number you're carrying on the project, did not cover 100% of the scope. And it could be that the bid insight actually alerts you to that anomaly. Now, having said that, let's take a look at what we mean by suggested subcontractors and bid insights. So previously on an earlier recording, we talked about the concept of similar projects. If I click on the Vancouver Medical Center and I see over here on my flyout panel on the right-hand side, this new tab called Insights, I see that the Vancouver Medical Center has 14 projects that we've done in the past that are similar. I can see those projects if I hit my preview here. But instead, notice what I've got an option here. It says use suggested subcontractors, and of the different indexes that I had, I told it to use the measure twice construction index. And I'm going to go ahead and go into the bid room for the Vancouver Medical Center and see what we mean by suggested subcontractors. So if I come in here, I see my project. I can see I've got one of my bid packages here called plumbing. I'm actually going to go into the plumbing bid package, point out a few things here. Again, you'll notice that I've got subcontractors that are already populated in my package. I could still add subcontractors, add additional subs, delete subs, but these subs were added automatically by BidMatrix because we found that these subs had bid the plumbing bid package on 3 or more previous projects that were in my similar projects results. So they get added here automatically. In addition to that, when I click in a cell, I can see down in the lower right an insight to a bid down here at the very bottom. In this particular case, $250,000. If I come over here to Purdy Swift, we'll click in the first cell for fire sprinklers, and I can see that we're expecting a bid. While we have a budget of $263,000, we're expecting a bid somewhere in the range of $292,000. Now, how is it getting that information? What it's doing, you'll notice here, every one of these balls, every one of these data points that you see in the graph is a past bid that we've received from Purdy Swift for fire sprinklers. And this trend line is what allows us to determine what their bid would most likely be on this project, or within some range, right? It's not going to be $292,000, obviously, but somewhere in the ballpark of that number. It's able to do that because it's taken the unit prices for every one of these data points for past work, and it's used my cost index, my inflationary index, and potentially regional index to bring those data points forward to today's date and location, if I'm using a location-based index. And from that, it's able to do the trend line and calculate a unit price, an indexed unit price for the current project. And then to make it even more powerful, when I do receive, I'm going to move to the next cell down because I actually entered the bid that I received from the subcontractor of $840,000. Based on the way this sub has bid this work previously for plumbing, we were expecting to bid somewhere around $1,071,000. They gave us a bid of $840,000, which is 27% less than what we were anticipating. Now, as you know, that could be a good number. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's a hole in their bid, that they've got missing scope. But when I see that kind of discrepancy, it may cause me to look at their bid more closely. Now, here's the other thing going on. These are not just data points. When I hover over a data point for a past project, it tells me the name of that project. It shows me the unit price that was actually bid on that project, in this case from Purdy Swift for plumbing, and that's the normalized number. It actually shows me the normalized unit price, and when I mean the indexed unit price, it shows me the name of the project, the size of the project, the location of the project, and in this case, the city urgent care project was a 2020 project, a January of 2020 project. So I can see all that right here. In fact, you'll notice when I come over the name of that project, it's a link. So if I were looking at that data point of a project that was done in 2020, and specifically the city urgent care project, I can actually jump to that project. If I click on this, it will actually open up that project in an additional tab on my screen. And that is very helpful because, again, I may want to dig into a little bit more about that project if that data point looks odd to me. Now, in addition to that, you could say, show my cost breakdown. And here, if you look at this, I'm looking at index value. So I can see what the budget was for that particular project, city urgent care. I can see what our budget was. I can see the impact of the index to that budget. And I can therefore foresee my indexed budget for that particular project. If I look over here, I can see the bid amount for Purdy Swift. I can see how it was indexed, what dollars needed to be added to that project to bring that 2020 project forward to today's date. And then I can see what the actual index bid would have been after applying the index. I can also see what the awarded amount was for the project. In a similar way, I can see how the awarded amount would have been indexed and what the newly indexed value would have been for the awarded amount. So I can get all that information at my fingertips, but remember the key here is I want to be alerted to anomalies or things that don't seem very explainable so that I can dive into that particular bid in more detail and help explain either that number is a valid number or I need to adjust that number or maybe level that bid because this alerted me to some missing scope. So extremely valuable. This is what we meant on the very first training video, that we are putting your bid history to work for you to minimize risk and help make sure that you get awarded projects at the right price and not because you overlooked some missing scope. In this recording, we will talk about another option that is part of the 3.7 release of BidMatrix. It has to do with publishing project estimates. We've added an option that allows you to publish a project. Projects that are published are available when searching for similar projects. So projects that aren't published will not be searched and will not show up in your list of similar projects. Projects that are published cannot be edited when they're in a published state. A published project can be unpublished, edited, and published again if necessary. Although you may want to leave some projects permanently unpublished if you don't want them to be part of your portfolio of projects that get searched and are used for things like bid insights. Only users with an administrative role or a librarian role can publish and unpublish projects. So people who have a license to BidMatrix but are a user and not an administrator or a librarian cannot publish or unpublish projects. So where do you do that? Let's take a look. And you do that right here. So here's my list of projects. One of the things that you can see right away is that some of these projects have a badge in the upper right corner. That actually lets you know that that project is published and at this point cannot be edited. But it is available again when I'm searching for projects that are similar to a project I'm currently creating. How do I publish projects? I could highlight a project. Here's an example of a project that has not been published. And I know that because there's no badge in the upper right corner. When I click on the project, I can see in the lower right-hand corner of the navigation panel, I see there is an option there to publish that project. When I click publish, that project now has the badge in the upper right. It's in a published state. Another place that you can do and accomplish the same thing is to click on the ellipsis on the tile here. And because the project is published, I have the option to unpublish the project. Then I could go back into the estimate itself, make changes, make modifications if I want to, and then I could come back out here and publish again. And so that's it for published projects.